Okay.
We're live.
Yay! Hi, everyone. I am really, really excited to be here moderating this Queer Characters in Magical Worlds chat, just all about queer YA fantasy and paranormal, and that's some of my favorite stuff. So let's get talking about it. I am Dahlia Adler, author of a bunch of YA books, none of which are magical, and the founder of LGBTQ Reads and book blogger for BuzzFeed. And I am excited to pass the mic over to the authors that you've come to hear. So let's start with Aiden.
Hello, I'm Aiden. I am the author of Cemetery Boys, which is my debut book coming out on September 1st. It is a paranormal fantasy romance about a transgender brujo who is on a mission to find out what happened to his cousin who died, and he accidentally summons the spirit of the high school bad boy, and it turns into a adventure and mystery solving caper with lots of shenanigans.
Best. All right, Anna-Marie.
Hi, I'm Anna-Marie McLemore. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer Latinx non-binary author who writes queer Latinx non-binary fairy tales, and my most recent one is Dark and Deep as Red. The short description of this book is Red Shoes plus Medieval Queers. The slightly longer description is that this is a reimagining of the Hans Christian Andersen fairy tale, The Red Shoes, through the lens of the 1518 Dancing Plague.
Cool. Adrienne.
All right. My name is Adrienne Strickland. I publish under A.M. Strickland, and I am the author of Beyond the Black Door. I'm queer, and this book is queer. It's an asexual romance with dark fantasy, primarily romance with lots of queer characters in it, and it's about a girl who can walk through other people's souls while they sleep. And in this world, souls manifest as like kind of huge spaces that you can explore. And in every soul, she is followed by a black door that she's been warned never ever to open. And of course, she opens it, and everything goes downhill from there.
All right, Alex.
I'm Alex London, author most recently of Black Wings Beating and Red Skies Falling, the first two books in the Skybound saga. The third book, Gold Wings Rising, comes out on September 1st. The Skybound Saga is an epic fantasy series set in a world of cutthroat falconry. It's the story of a brother and sister in that world who are, at the beginning in Black Wings Beating, are coerced onto a quest to capture and tame the giant psychic eagle that killed their father. It's an epic adventure, sort of. I describe it, it's like Lord of the Rings, except instead of a ring, it's a giant psychic bird, and instead of hobbits, it's queer teenagers.
I love it because I've read all the books in question, and still, like, I hear the descriptions and I'm like, I need to read that. Oh, you already read that. You loved it. That's why you're doing this. So I want to jump right into the world building parts because it's cool the way you all do it very beautifully, but very differently. And I want to ask you, where does world building start for you? But also, at what point in the world building process do you sort of figure out how queerness is going to be viewed and play into the world that you're creating? Go backwards, Alex.
So when I start world building, I mean, like a concept will come to me, and it's sort of like, I picture it like throwing a log on a fire, you know, like you don't know exactly which, like a lot of sparks fly up when you throw the log on, you don't know exactly which catches. So I kind of have a concept that's the log I throw on, and a bunch of stuff fly up. So in this case, birds, killer bird world. And then the things I have to kind of figure out to make the world work is I have to immediately think about who has power and how do they keep it? And along what axes does power move? And that's kind of the moment where queerness enters, because I have to think about, okay, is this a world where gender or sexuality is an axis along which power moves? In the case of Black Wings Beating, no, it's not. So then I have to make sure I'm not reproducing our world's gender and sexuality dynamics in my world, which means unpacking my own biases and assumptions that I bring to the work as, you know, a cis white man in America in 2020. So it starts with the concept and then turns inward to me and then back out. And it's this constant interplay between the world I'm creating and its culture and its systems and its history and the world I live in and how I'm relating to the two and breaking that apart, if that makes sense.
Yeah, actually, I know I was just going in reverse order, but I actually really did want to start with you because I think of these 4 books in particular, yours is the one that isn't pulling those views from our world. And in the other 3, being transgender, being asexual, those really well, I'm not going to speak for you. Adrienne, why don't you talk about it?
It's similar to the
blog, but I'm going to leave that to you.
No problem. Yeah, similar. I kind of think of, especially with Beyond the Black Door, it's like a seed that I had to start with. And for Beyond the Black Door, it was the idea of kind of these interior spaces that people have. And I kind of grew it from there. And also like Alex, when I start building a world, I think, okay, what are the politics? What are the religion? And then from there, it's like, I usually always have queer characters in my story, so figure out how they fit. For Beyond the Black Door, I knew immediately that I wanted to have a hypersexualized world, much like our own, and how an asexual character would fit into that, and kind of, because you have to be asleep next to somebody to access their soul house in the book. And so for me, that was immediately an intriguing point of, what if my character was sex repulsed, asexual? You can be asexual and be fine with sex, be, mediocre or not want it at all. And I really wanted to explore the idea of a sex repulsed asexual girl wanting to fulfill this role as a soul walker and having a really difficult time doing it and how she'd navigate that. So, yeah.
Very cool. Right. Anna-Marie?
So a lot of what I write is either magical realism or magical realism influenced. And when you're talking about magical realism, so much of the magic is about community. It's an undercurrent. Usually nobody really owns it. It may be something that's given to you for a little bit. It might be in your possession for a little while or in a very specific context, but often it's within families, it's within communities. So when I think of the idea of community and communal magic, that connects to queerness, that connects to found family. In Wild Beauty, I write about this group of queer Latina cousins who together rule these gardens, but these gardens that also fight back and try to tell them secrets about the land itself. In Dark and Deepest Red, this Latina girl encounters a pair of enchanted red shoes and has to sort of figure out what is the magic trying to tell you about your community, about yourself, about your identity. So much of when I think about communal magic, a lot of that comes back to identity. It comes back to being Latinx, to being mixed race, and to being queer, and to thinking about what is your community. And sometimes that is your family, the family you grew up with. And sometimes that's the family you create. That's your found family. That's the community you make and that you claim as your family.
All right. Aiden?
So for Cemetery Boys, what I was really interested in is kind of, there's a lot of magic systems in the world where it's based in gender and it's very binary and there's no room for like any of the grace or like in between space to like come to fruition. It's almost like trans and non-binary folks or agender are just like completely forgot about. We're like, we can't talk about them because then it messes with what my magic system is. So when I was creating Cemetery Boys, it was really important to me that it was a magic system that knows and understands you and who you are. So for Yadriel, he, everyone thinks that he's supposed to be a bruja, but when he tries to practice the bruja magic of healing, terrible, awful things happen. And it's when he finally like breaks tradition and goes through his rite of passage as a brujo that the magic, or that Lady Death, who is like their patron, is like, I see you, I know who you are, this is your magic, you are a brujo. And that was really important for me. And then kind of taking that magic, and Yadriel and his queerness suddenly breaks this understanding of this entire Latinx brujex community of how they understand how their traditions work and how their magic works. And that was something that was really important to me, what I really wanted to press, that like, just because so many of our beliefs are based in tradition and being like, well, why is it this way? And it's only that way because it's always been that way. We haven't really pushed against it or anything. So Yadriel shows up and he, all of a sudden now everyone has to look at it a different way. And that was really exciting for me. And like the actual magic system itself, I really wanted to showcase Latinx culture and magic. So the entire magic system is based around Dia de Muertos, Day of the Dead. Like when it comes to the Marigolds and how they help the ancestors pass over into the land of the living for the day. And everything is kind of steeped in that. And that was really important to me. And yeah.
That's really cool. So as queer authors who are writing queer fantasy, who are putting yourselves in these books, and also putting other identities into these books, how would you say the reality has fared against your expectations for how that would go over in publishing, how it would be received by readers? I'm always curious to know how queer authors feel about that experience, especially because I think it's been shifting so much in recent years, and queer fantasy in particular, I think has really blown up. So definitely curious to hear how that has weighed against your expectations and your feelings. Throw it out to anybody who wants to speak about that first. I know some people need a little more time to think about that.
When I started writing, I always had, cis straight characters as the lead, because I figured that like it wouldn't sell well, that my publisher would be scared away from it. But as I've been writing more and more, and especially I was really surprised with Beyond the Black Door, and the next book Imprint picked up, is that they like want that front and center. And so I think that's just a really good sign of the changing market and what readers are wanting. And so yeah, I've been really pleasantly surprised with the most recent couple of books.
That's awesome.
It's been really amazing to see since my first book with a queer main character was I wrote it in 2012, came out in 2013, just to see how much the like landscape.
Really wild, yeah.
Yeah, it's so like the queerness was like nowhere mentioned in the advertising for that first book.
Mm-hmm.
And now every YA deal announcement, especially in fantasy, is always like pushing the queerness as like a selling point.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely want to talk about that.
It's been really cool to do that, and
Yeah.
kind of like giving me whiplash.
Mm-hmm.
I have noticed, and I've noticed we're still struggling, I think, with gay boy stories specifically, that there is a kind of gay boy that is more accessible to the readership than others. There's still a lot of pressure to write a certain kind of gay boy character.
Mhm.
And the messiness, there's less room for messiness. And when there is messiness, I feel like it's very prescribed the kind of messiness it needs to be. And I mean, that's the journey any marginalized identity has in storytelling, right? Like making the wholeness of their humanity accessible to a broader audience than just the people who get that identity. So we're still, I think, in the growing pains of that. But the market, the books are there now, and people and publishers are not finding them as a barrier. Now, hopefully, the audiences will catch up.
Yeah.
And I see you doing a lot of nodding. You have thoughts?
Yeah, so you said Aiden, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I was like, oh my gosh, I was here.
Sorry, I know you all have A names. I don't know
I
who's
know,
that was.
it's really complicated. For someone who's deaf in one ear, it's just complicated. So Cemetery Boys was actually my option book. The first book that I sold was Lost in the Neverwoods, which I just did a cover reveal for.
Yes,
and
it's beautiful.
It is beautiful.
It's so gorgeous. Like, oh my God. I was floored when I first saw it. And so Lost in the Neverwoods, again, was the first book that I sold. And that book is, it's cis, it's white, and it's straight, because that's what I thought I could sell.
Right.
And that was what I sold. So it was kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And when it came time to start pitching ideas to my incredible editor, Holly West, over at Swoon Reads, I sent like a bunch of different ideas. I think I did like 5. Like the first idea was like really thought out, and I was like, I already have like 50K of this written, and it's wonderful. And here's an outline. And then like as the list went down, it got like vaguer and like more vague. And then
Here's a line I wrote on a napkin.
Yeah, and then so Cemetery Boys was a whole whopping paragraph long. And I think every sentence except for one ended in a question mark. And what I find really interesting about that is that I was asking permission basically to write my identity. I was asking permission to write a Latinx trans boy who's also gay. And that's, looking back on it, is kind of mind-boggling, right? It's like I didn't feel like I would be allowed to, or that anyone would be interested in it. And then when my editor responded, she was like, yes, that's the one that we want. We want Cemetery Boys. This sounds incredible. And I was like, really? That's the one. Huh. I was like, all right. I didn't like see it coming, and I had my expectations so low, I think on purpose, being like, here's just a tiny little thing and I'm just gonna throw it out there. You can send it back if you want, it's fine. It's like not a big deal. I'm not like invested. And so I have been really wonderfully, pleasantly surprised by the openness and the kind of welcoming of me and Yadril and Cemetery Boys into the writing community, especially the young adult writing community. It's been really wonderful and beautiful and has exceeded my expectations. And every time a reader like sends me a message on Instagram or through my website, and they're like, I connected so much with the story. This is the first time I've ever seen myself in a book. Like it gets me at my heart. And it's like, when I was going into this, I thought I was going to be a little blip of a book that just kind of existed quietly. And that if I connected that way with one reader, like that would have fulfilled what I wanted with this book. And having so much support is overwhelming and unexpected and just wonderful. It's wonderful.
So nice that those are the messages you get, because the messages I get at LGBTQ Reads are, you've already read Cemetery Boys, I hate you.
That's how I
There's
feel.
a lot of anger at me about it.
I'm sorry.
I think more than I've ever seen for anything, but in my defense, when I read it, it was still coming out in June before every single 2020 book got pushed.
Yeah, it's just a long, like a tease at this point.
I've never apologized so much for the mere act of reading a book in my entire life.
I'm still mad at you.
Yeah. It's fair. It's really good. And Anna-Marie, I know your journey has gotten queerer and transer as you've gone since The Weight of Feathers. So you have
I had to sort of get out of my own way a little bit, because I wrote Weight of Feathers, which is about a Latina girl and a Romany boy, both cis characters. And it went surprisingly well. Like I wrote about like being Latinx, and it went well. So I felt like I had gotten away with something. And I was like, okay, for my next book, it's gotta be white, it's gotta be straight, it's gotta be cis. I'm going to be a good author. And I kept trying to write a book that was just like, it was not what the book was supposed to be. I was just stripping out every aspect of my own identity and trying to make a story something that it wasn't. And it was just bad. And my editor tried like in every way to gently guide me, until eventually I was like, you know what? I'm either gonna miss my deadline, or I'm gonna have to. It got to the point where I had to write the book I was afraid to write, and that ended up being When the Moon Was Ours. And this book that I gave my publisher,
white, least straight, least cis book ever.
I tried to make that book white, straight, and cis, and it was so bad. Like it bears, what I was trying to write bears no resemblance to what When the Moon Was Ours ended up being. And I'm so grateful I got to write that book, and I'm so grateful that when I turned it into my editor, I had warned her about nothing. I hadn't told her, like, this is a magical realism book about like a queer brown girl and a brown trans boy. And I didn't tell her that. I did not tell her that they have sex on page 10. I did not tell her that they have sex again on page 200. And I was like, okay, I'm just sending this and we're going to see what happens. And they were like, she was really supportive of it. My publisher was really supportive of it. And it was embraced in a way that I never could have imagined. And I was like, okay, you all have reinforced my queerness. Look what you have done. It's going to get browner and queerer with every book. So that is what I keep doing, is like and I relate to this. I relate to what you're saying, Aiden, about getting permission, because it felt like permission. And yeah, so with Dark and Deepest Dread, I got to write, like, the ending of this book is probably the queerest thing I have ever written, and I never would have done that unless there was love for the queerness that I wanted to put onto the page, but that I was holding back. So a lot of it is about just letting myself and my community onto the pages that I write.
That's awesome. So I think we maybe lost Alex temporarily because internet. But there he is. But given what Alex was talking about throwing a log on the fire and then kind of the sparks rise from it ties into another question I had, because I have actually a lot of curiosity about world building since all mine is contemporary, which is, what is your favorite of the little details of a fantasy world to write? Like the food, the decor, the animals, what's your like favorite thing to dig into that's totally like ridiculously has you spending an hour longer on Pinterest than anybody ever needs to do?
Clothes for me. I read some authors who are like, oh, my editor asked me to describe outfits, and that's my worst nightmare. I didn't describe a single one, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to cut like a paragraph about somebody's trousers. So like, I just really like it. I think it's just colorful and just expresses, it's how people present themselves, and I think that that's just a really cool aspect to show what kind of world these characters are inhabiting and how they want to present themselves. So I love to nerd out over that.
All right.
I love funerals. I love figuring out what they do with their dead, because I think it says everything about how they think about life. So I love thinking about funerals, weirdly, which is dark, I know.
It is dark, but it's a good point.
Also curse words. I love inventing curse words. My books are in like middle schools, and it's because there's no bad words, but they're just filled with cursing. It's just not cursing,
right.
Cursing invented. And I love inventing curse words because the same way I think you can learn a lot about what a society values and what they don't value, what they look down on, what they want to other by how they curse. And so funerals and cursing are my favorite.
All right, cool. Anna-Marie, I know. Even your dulce is Pam, so I think
I know. It's always like the tagline of my next book, courtesy of Dahlia Adler. Kind of, yeah, though. So I love writing about food. Absolutely love writing about food. Sometimes the food is magical, like in Mirror Season, which is coming up next. And sometimes it's just pretty, and sometimes it's just there. I think it's part of being like Latinx. There's just like the food is its own language. And so we speak in food, like, and I relate to the clothes thing. Like I have, in the book that I'm working on right now, I'm pretty much designing like the non-binary wardrobe of my dreams. I'm like, that outfit's gonna go there, that outfit's gonna go there. And I got to do all the ball gowns in Wild Beauty. I also love finding what like beautiful thing is going to be absolutely effing terrifying, like whether that's like murderous gardens like I wrote in Wild Beauty, or like swans that are trying to curse you in Blanca y Roja, or like, look at these pretty red shoes in Dark and Deepest Dread that are going to try to dance you to death. I love taking beautiful things and making them frightening. So I guess that's like I love world building in general, clearly, since I like food and clothes and also scary, beautiful things. So I love this question.
Found the right job.
So that's funny, because like taking beautiful things and making them terrifying. I like taking terrifying things and making them beautiful. So like in Cemetery Boys, kind of also going back to what Alex said, is that Dia de Muertos, it's basically a huge celebration for all of our loved ones who have died, and we are remembering them. And in Cemetery Boys, we're quite literally welcoming them back to the land of the living. And so I like talking about, like, it talks about death a lot, but in Latinx culture, like, death is not seen as the end, and it's also seen really as something that's beautiful and not necessarily something to mourn. We of course mourn, but it's not the end all be all. And so it was really, talking about like spending time, way too much time like describing things, is like I spent so much time describing the cemetery in Cemetery Boys, especially when it's done up for Dia de Muertos, because it's like, the cemeteries are stunning. They're beautiful. They're done up with candles, and there's marigolds everywhere. There's picture frames. There's a bunch of food. And kind of going with food again, food is so important in Latinx culture and also like our belief systems. So for Dia de Muertos, we have Pan de Muertos, so bread of the dead. And it kind of already has its own magical capabilities because it's like when you set out that food and the spirits of the ancestors come and eat like the essence of the food, which means the leftovers you can eat and there's no calories in it. So that was something that I really wanted to talk about too, because instead of it just being like this belief that we have, it's like, no, yes, this is a literal thing in Cemetery Boys. So
Man,
yeah.
I feel like I'm in the wrong culture. We leave rocks on tombstones. Like, yeah, that's our thing. So you kind of answered this, but what, I guess I want to know what kinds of things inspire and influence the aesthetics of your world, which, Aiden, sorry, I know you kind of already got there, but if there's anything more you want to say about it, but or you could talk about it for a different book if you want to. What's inspiring and influencing something else? Any aesthetics or details really, but I love when you can see kind of like tangible influence of a culture in a book, or yeah.
So for, I mean, everything that I've already said about Cemetery Boys, and like the like gold and fire and marigolds aesthetic, like that's like the entire book. And I'm a very visual writer. Like I want to describe things exactly how you're seeing, so it's almost like a head movie, a picture movie in your head or whatever. So marigolds are a huge one, but also Latinx ceremonies, cemeteries, especially in Mexico, look very different than American or European cemeteries. They're a lot more colorful. We have these beautiful like houses for urns that almost look like colorful bird houses, which I've always been really like in love with because they're beautiful and they're stunning.
You're giving Alex ideas now.
Yeah. So there's very like specific parts about Latinx culture and our funerals and our cemeteries, and again, Dia de Muertos, and really taking all of those really beautiful aesthetics and turning it into something that's purely magic.
Alex, did killer birds come from something?
Kind of from everything. I mean, they really did start as kind of a metaphor for the patriarchy, but they then became actual literal birds. And in doing research, I because the birds were the start, I was lucky that pretty much every culture on Earth at some point has invented some way of training and hunting or fighting or worshiping or doing something with birds of prey. So the book itself wasn't drawn from any one culture. I could draw from various times in history and various cultures, but in doing that, I had to be extremely careful because I don't want to be stomping through someone's graveyard. I don't want to be taking cool birdhouses that are sacred to one group of people just because they're a cool detail, you know, like they're not my people. And so I had to be very careful. So I did a ton of research on the aesthetics of falconry throughout cultures and throughout time. But I had to go deep enough to know I wasn't stealing anything sacred or blaspheming in some way. I read a lot about, because I knew it was a sky-oriented culture primarily. I read a lot about people who live at higher altitudes just because I figured, oh, if you're a bird type people, you probably live up in the mountains. So the kind of practical, the aesthetic came from the practical of like, okay, what do people who live at high altitudes, like how do they build their houses? What materials do they have access to? So that stuff informed the construction of the world that then informed the aesthetic of it. I cheated a little. I gave them access to like birds that maybe wouldn't work in that climate. I was just like, they get all the birds they want.
Well, that's the beauty of fantasy.
Yeah. Except for weirdly flamingos. I think I didn't give them flamingos and I didn't give them penguins. For some reason, those seemed like too specific. But like I gave them everything else. Why wouldn't I? Like, but I didn't.
Okay. Anna-Marie also doing magical realism, obviously your influences. But I'd love to hear you talk about it.
So part of it is the sort of fairy tale aesthetic. I grew up kind of wanting to be both a Disney prince and a Disney princess. So you have some of that, like what we think of as fairy tale aesthetic in there, but also fairy tales that come from like the traditions I grew up in, because every single tradition has fairy tales. Like we have a story that could be considered analogous, just no white and rose red. I personally I like ours because it's kind of the bad girl who solves things and who gets things done in our version of it. So you have these fairy tales in every tradition, and these ones that sort of talk to each other. So that's one part of it. And specifically in Dark and Deepest Red, I thought a lot about family craft. Whether it's in 1518, you have this family of Romany women who makes ink, and they're going to do it in a different way because they're Romany. They're going to do it in a different way than white ink makers are going to, because of specific beliefs they have, because of processes they have. And then in the current timeline, where you have the Oliva family and a Latina girl named Rosea, they have this family craft of making shoes that was very much influenced for me by embroidery, specifically regional embroidery. And I thought about how there's sort of this picture of like that Americans have of like Mexican embroidery, even though it's not Mexican embroidery, it's region specific. Like it changes depending on where you're talking about. It's not the embroidery monolith. Apparently this is the monolith I'm going to talk about today, the embroidery monolith. But so part of what's beautiful about it is that these different types of embroideries tell stories, and they tell family stories. And when I've gone back through family photos, that's part of how you can figure out the stories of your family, even if you don't have all of them. Is sometimes like, what are they wearing? Was it theirs, or did they borrow it from someone else? What is the embroidery there, and what does it tell you about where they came from, where your family came from? So that was a big influence in thinking about craft in general, and specifically thinking about Rosea's family, like having this family tradition of making beautiful shoes and what it means to them.
And Adrienne, obviously gods and religion and souls play a huge role beyond the Black Door.
Yeah.
So I assume that's got influence from somewhere.
Yeah, I didn't want to borrow from any particular culture, so I really my worlds, especially in the next book too, are really inspired by like sleepscapes and dreamscapes, and also deathscapes. Like the next book has lots of underworld stuff in it, and so they're all very gothic. Just like so just kind of got to just dive into my own brain and like be really, really creative, because there are these fantastical places in both the books I've been writing that don't really exist in the real world. And so, yeah, I guess like how the cultures I build deal with sleep and death and like a lot of dark imagery, just really, I got to go wild with that. So, yeah.
That's making me so excited. I'm like, underworld? Yeah, let's talk about it. Sounds great.
A lot of different stuff in here. I like it. Okay, without spoiling, can you talk about a secondary character, ideally a queer one, but doesn't have to be, that you love in your books? Because I feel like they never get enough love, but there are some really great ones in your books. So I'm gonna throw that out there. Ode to a secondary character. Love interests count. And, best friends, parents. You don't have to even, a secondary character you love or loathe.
My secondary characters tend to be my favorite, and they also tend to be, not lately, but they tend to be the queerest too. So Basra from Shadowrun, and Kihan from Beyond the Black Door, and in my next book there's a character called Jaffa who's Ace in Envy, and they're just like they're kind of where they're often the most like representative of me characters, with like transness or aceness or things that I was kind of afraid to put into the main characters for a while. So but that's changing. So yeah, they tend to be some of my favorites.
I think that's true a lot in queer lit, which is what prompts me to ask that question when I'm asking queer authors. You kind of edge your way into writing what you're comfortable with. Like Aiden, you were talking about being your girl, and Anna-Marie talking about them being your second books, where you went with that. So
I kind of like writing like the token straight side character. Like some of my favorite characters I've written are like the sassy straight best friend, who usually things don't go well for. It's my way of.
As always, I love the bury your straights trend.
I'm trying to make it happen.
Like burying the Alice's hat characters is like my favorite thing to spot in books.
So I love writing in Black Wings Beating. Niall, the straight dude best friend, / sort of like it's a one-way thing for him, but he has he's in love with the ace character, Kylie, and just making him like a really good dude. It's extremely hard to imagine a really good straight guy, and so I was kind of like, okay, like let's do this. So I really love
craft of world building.
Yeah, it's I really had to stretch myself. But in terms of the queer secondary characters, I mean, the love interest, Joan, just was he's just, he loves making up ridiculous rhymes and puns and things. And he's had a really traumatic life. And he's kind of my model for like, okay, how do we not deny our past, but how do we heal? And he's definitely Bryson's model for how to heal. And so I loved writing someone who was farther along in their own healing journey than I, as the author, am. It pushed me emotionally to kind of deal with myself. And it's just a joy to write someone who was like, in spite of it all, doing okay and still had a sense of humor and is pretty funny and ridiculous and loving and open and warm. And I loved the challenge of writing him. And I love writing terrible, terrible poetry. Bird themed dirty limerick.
I feel that.
Just a joy to write.
Understandable. Anna-Marie, how about you? You have any favorites or least favorites?
So in the 1518 storyline in Dark and Deepest Dread, you have this couple who's Lavinia, who's a Romany girl, and Alistair, who's my medieval trans boy apprentice, who I realized I had a lot more in common with after the book was already going to print. This is like my book where I realized I was non-binary.
Isn't that fun?
And Alistair has a much better gaydar than Lavinia does. So some of my favorite secondary characters are all the queers around that he realizes are queer a lot earlier than Lavinia does. So they have this whole queer community around them. I'm thinking particularly of, and I don't mind if this is a spoiler because I don't really consider like sexual orientation a spoiler. But you have this like one lesbian couple who like Lavinia just doesn't get it. Like all the signs are there that like they are a couple. They go everywhere together. Like they hold hands, and she's just like they're really good friends. And she just adorably does not get it that there's this whole queer and trans and non-binary community that's around them. And I don't think this is too much of a spoiler for my super queer ending and my army of medieval queers. But she has this moment where she's like, oh, and Alistair's like, yeah. the queers are everywhere. So I love that part of writing this book.
Sounds right. How about you, Aiden?
I love talking about Julian, who is the love interest in Cemetery Boys. He's interesting and he's really fun. I think for your typical like love interest in fantasy, they look a very certain way. They're usually really tall, blue eyes, black hair that's pushed back, and they're really like dark and brooding. And Julian, the only like a bad boy part about himself is what society and specifically like school expectations have placed upon him. He's not actually a bad boy at all. He's a hyperactive golden retriever. And he's unapologetically queer. He's gay. He knows he's gay. He's like, that's it. That's all there is to it. And all of his friends, he has a found family, and all of them are queer because queer folks travel together. That's just how it is. Survival instinct. And I think what was really important to me was to have a love interest who accepted Yadril as he is, as a gay trans boy, without question. Like as soon as Julian learns Yadril's pronouns, it's like, okay, Yadril's a boy. Got it, logged it away. Julian's actually the one that tells Yads that he's gay first. And Yadril's like, oh my gosh, oh, there's like, I'm connecting with like another like queer person. This is so exciting. Yeah, just like, yeah, you know, me too. I'm also gay. And he's like, and Julian's like, okay, cool. Like, let's move on with what we're doing, weirdo. Like, so kind of just, it was important to me that Yadril had someone who unequivocally accepted him as he is, as a boy. And it was important for me that when talking about this book, Yadril and Julian are a gay couple. Julian is gay, like, because Yadril is a boy. Like, that's it. That's all there is to it. And that was really important to me. And to like let readers like know that there's people out there who are going to love and accept them unquestioningly. It might be take a little bit to find them, but they're out there. So when it came to writing a love interest, Julian and his queerness was really important to the story.
Cool. All right, who's ready to make some recommendations? Because I want to hear what everybody else is loving, what I need to be reading most importantly, but I guess other people are probably interested too. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go first. What? No, fine. Aiden, you can go first.
I was like, I have my books right here, and I'm ready to scream about them.
Okay. Yeah.
So I have A Song Below Water by Bethany C. Morrow, which is about mermaids in Portland, and I live in Portland, so it's like, yes, absolutely. And then right now, I just started You Should See Me in a Crown by Leah Johnson. And it's a prom contemporary romance story with queer characters, and I am absolutely adoring it so far. So those are my two ones that I'm obsessed with right now. Well, and okay, just one more. I just got this, and this book is stunning.
It's
like,
so good.
Oh my gosh, it's beautiful. And even like I have to up my like bio section because look at how pretty it is. I'm so excited for this book. Anyways, okay. That's it. Just
that's I'll Be the One by Lila.
Yes. I got so excited. I was just like, look at how pretty it is.
And it's an MF romance where both of them are bi.
Yes.
Yeah. K-pop themed. Okay, good. Because I was pushing to go first because as it happens, there's no FF fantasy represented in here. So I was going to come and show some off that I love, but then you jump in and you're like, all right. I got some sapphic books for you, so I'm into it. But I am going to mention a few that I love, which are, there we go. The Never Tilting Worlds by Rinchu Pecco. Can you tell I'm not used to virtual panels yet? And I love this one. It's Frozen meets Mad Max Fury Road. And they're one of the two main characters is in an FF romance, and I'm not going to spoil anything about it, but I loved it. And these characters stuck with me so deeply, as you can see in my blurb on the back. And another one I loved was The Midnight Lie by Marie Rotkowski, who also wrote one of my favorite fantasy series with The Winner's Curse. So this is her new one, which is FF. And it's just phenomenal. And one that's coming up that no one can be mad at me anymore that I read and they didn't because it comes out July 7th. Is Cinderella is Dead. Yes, I read it. Yes, people are mad that I've read this one too, but it comes out really soon, so everyone's got to get over it.
Yeah, I'm so mad about it.
Just do it.
I'm dying to get my hands on it.
Oh my God, yes. Queer Black girl overthrowing the patriarchy in a world where the Cinderella story is so idealized that everybody is supposed to like be her. And I'm not going to talk more about it because I don't want to spoil it, but get it. Cinderella is Dead out July 7th. Okay, now someone else. Adrienne, did you have any?
Yeah. Right now I'm reading The Sound of the Stars by Alicia Dow, and I don't have, they're on my Nook because I have too many books so I cannot play to show you. And Kay Ancrum's The Weight of the Stars, and I'm really enjoying those. And I have Felix Ever After to get to after. I'm really excited about that, and I cannot wait for Cemetery Boys. So.
Yeah, I really wish I could just talk about Cemetery Boys, but I haven't read it, so I don't have it.
So mad.
Yeah,
so mad.
I got to second the Bethany Morrow Song Below Water. Definitely have to second that one.
Okay, I have it. I haven't read it yet, but everything I hear is just phenomenal.
Stuff that's coming. I'm really stoked for Caleb Roerig's Fell of Dark. Gay vampire romp.
Yes, I'm so excited to see vampires coming back in this way.
Can't wait for that one. And I'm gonna give some love to the backlist, I think.
Oh,
you know, like queer books did not just start existing this year. So I've got to say, like, we all owe a debt in the fantasy space to Melinda Lowe and Ash.
Mm-hmm.
The Cinderella retelling.
Yeah. Which they did a 10th anniversary re-release last year. So you can actually pretty easily get your hands on it now, which is nice. Not always true for books from 2010.
And then one of the first non-binary sci-fi fantasy books I read in the like YA space, the sort of newer YA, is also a couple years old now. Lizard Radio by Pat Schmatz, which is this wild, weird, dystopian, strange, fever dream of a book with a non-binary lead that is very cool. I've never really read anything quite like it before or since. So I want to shout out that.
Yeah, that is a cool one. Anna-Marie?
Okay, I'll name one in the category of I'm really glad this is out, so people are no longer mad at me for recommending it when it's not out yet. The anthology of Phoenix First Must Burn.
Yes.
Absolutely stunning. And that is one I was like, this needs to be out so I can recommend it to everybody. So I am so glad it is. And in terms of one that's coming out.
Thank you, Aiden, for the visual. Edited by Patrice Caldwell.
Yes, it is a stunning book. Oh, I love this book so much, and I'm so glad it's out on shelves right now. And one that I'm looking forward to is the sequel to Shatter the Sky. Rebecca Kim Wells is the author. Storm the Earth is the sequel that is coming out this fall.
Yes, October 13th. I'm so excited about that one. I love Shatter the Sky. That's also, it's bisexual fantasy. And that is also great. Oh my God, there's so much good queer fantasy. And this was like such a stunning year for it. It's just really.
Dahlia, I love what an encyclopedia you are. I'm excited about this one. And you're like, yes, it's coming out on October 13th.
It always happens that afterwards people are like, what were the books you were talking about? I can't remember. So I try to give as much information so people can look them up as possible. And it's all in my head because I blog about it every single day. I literally just put Lizard Radio on a list on LGBTQ Reads today. So I'm like hearing it and I'm like, I was just on board with that book. I will throw out for some more non-binary fantasy, The Brilliant Death by Amy Rose Capetta, which I love and has a demigirl main character and a gender fluid love interest.
Some of the coolest world building in that too. Such cool world building.
They're just like knocking it out of the park with one thing after another, like The Lost Coast and Once and Future with Corey McCarthy, and just, it's pretty epic. We have some questions that I'm sorry I have been totally monopolizing you all, but I want to bring some other people's questions that are really great. We have the question, do you have advice for talking about your work when you've written an experience you share but maybe aren't publicly out about yet? Like gender identity, disability, trauma. Which, Anna-Marie, you were kind of there with, non-binary identity. And, I was there because after Under the Lights, you DM'd me on Twitter and said, so you're queer, right?
Did I say that? Oh, I hope
more politely, but that was the very beginning of my journey there.
I think I had this sort of analogous experience with like people asking me about that when The Moon Was Ours came out, and I think like we have to like draw our boundaries and like respect what kind of emotional labor we can do and what we can put out there. For me, it was partially I didn't know. Like it was sort of amazing that I didn't know, because I lived as a guy for a couple of years of my teen years, and I've sort of talked about this. Like we divide our brains in the way we need to like take care of ourselves and the way we have to survive. So that was part of my process of figuring things out. And I did have like I had like friends tell me, people are gonna ask you questions that you may or may not be ready for. And even though those questions still would have come, I wish I had listened to like my author friends more, who told me like people will ask questions, because I was like, nobody's gonna care about this book, nobody's gonna ask me things. And if I think like they knew before I did, like I just had to be ready for them. And if you still have to be ready to decide like what you're going to talk about and what you're not going to talk about, and that's scary. But even doing that work of like, this is what I'm ready to talk about and this is what I'm not. I'm coming up against that a little bit with the Mirror season, which is it's a Snow Queen reimagining about sexual assault, and a lot of it draws on my own experiences and draws on my experience with reporting with another sexual assault survivor, a survivor who said like, yeah, go ahead, you can talk about who I am, you can tell people who I am, I don't mind. And ultimately I decided like I don't want to do that, because if you ever meet this person, I want you to be able to meet him as him. So knowing other people's boundaries, if anyone else is getting pulled into that conversation, and deciding your own, I think that's the biggest thing. And it's hard, and recognizing that it's hard helps.
For sure.
Yeah, it's really difficult. It has been difficult for me from the beginning, because I feel like I've not had to, but I've come out on the internet through so many things, with being ace, with being genderqueer, and I even have some more stuff coming up in the next book that is like, oh, do I want to go there and talk about it? And I guess it's just based on what you're comfortable with. And I know there are a lot of authors who feel like they have to say, to come out and to justify why they wrote about what they wrote about. And I wish, it wasn't that way, but it's really tough. Just to decide, how public you want to be with your really personal life.
It's also really challenging because I think you don't always know when you're going into it. It's not like, well, I'm trying to hide my identity in this character. I think for a lot of us, we write to figure things out, and we don't even necessarily realize we're doing it. Thanks, Under the Lights. But like, I definitely in my next book, Cool for the Summer, I mean, there are things that are just like the way I wish certain things had happened, and it's, I'm not trying to like mask anything. I was just, whatever, I can't say anything without spoiling it, so I'm just going to stop talking about it. But a lot of it is kind of, you don't know until you already see it on the page, and then you're like, oh my God, that was me. I didn't realize that was me. I don't even know how to talk about that it was me in like a promotional or book discussion context, because like I got to go figure that out with like friends and a therapist first. So it's, I think, a weird process on a lot of levels, because it's not even happening the same way for everybody.
I spent a lot of time talking about my characters with my therapist. He quickly figured out that we weren't talking about my characters, but he kind of worked through the plots of the book. I thought I was writing about killer birds. It turns out I was writing about other things.
I love writing. It's terrible.
It only took me 4 books writing trans and non-binary characters to figure out that applied to me. In record time, only 4 books.
But then you got there. Let me see. Oh, we already got to what books do we recommend. So, okay, so then I'm going to ask another one, which is, what's your best piece of advice to those aspiring to write queer fantasy? Kind of don't know where to begin, or
I guess dig in and do what makes you happiest. I for the longest time I was always trying to write what I thought would be more palatable to other people, and it was only when I just really embraced what I wanted to write about that I had the most fun with it. And it seems like those books have touched readers more. So yeah, I'd say just dig in and go for it. Write that character you really want to write.
I would say, like, make it as queer as you want to make it. Like, just go for it. Like, especially when it comes to stories and fantasy, there's kind of this weird precedence that we have to automatically reflect what it's like being queer in our world, in fantastical worlds. And I personally would love to see worlds where queerness is the least interesting thing about a character, basically. And like, where homophobia or phobias and isms in general, like, just aren't in the picture. Just like let characters be queer and let them have their fun and go on adventures. And you know, you don't have to, but I would love to see more books like that.
You just described Blackwing's Beating, man.
Yes.
I would add to that, do your work. That, you know, we all bring assumptions, whoever we are, into fantasy, and do the work to break apart and question your own assumptions. That even the possibilities you can imagine aren't the only possibilities, right? And that's the cool thing about fantasy, is you can try and break out. However expansive your imagination, you can always push it further. And in creating queer futures, queer secondary worlds, you're actually giving readers a tool to create the next queer futures and queer secondary worlds, to go even bigger than you could. So you're kind of every unique individual pushing their possibilities a little bit farther, pushes our possibilities in the world a little bit farther. It's such a blessing and a challenge of writing queer genre fiction. So be ready to do the work and then just enjoy it. It's a gift, and it should be fun, but it should also be hard. Don't take it lightly.
Anybody else? All right, then if not, I'm actually going to ask a little bit more about that point. If anybody else has thoughts on two things that we touched on, one of which is you know, worlds in which homophobia and transphobia and aphobia exist, versus ones where they kind of blend in seamlessly, where varied sexual and gender orientations blend in seamlessly because that's the world, and you know, you've opted not to do that. But then also what you were talking about before, which was books being openly queer, because as I deal with often, you know, with the blogging that I do, some people can't safely bring books home that are super openly queer. So there's sort of been, you know, two different sides to that great excitement about how it's become, I don't want to say a marketing tool, but it has largely ceased to be something that is hidden in marketing. So those are two things I know we don't have a ton of time left, but I love to hear other people's thoughts on. So if anybody has thoughts in those directions.
I mean, I think we need both.
Yeah.
We need the big, visibly out books, so that people can read them, and so it destigmatizes all kinds of queerness, and so that kids who can maybe never check them out still see that they exist on the shelves.
Yeah.
And we also need I think you've called them the Under the Gaydar books.
Under the Gaydar, yeah, that's the feature on LGBTQ reads. Yeah.
That
yeah.
and adults who can't be seen reading those sorts of books still get to read, and so that straight kids can maybe be surprised by rooting for queer heroes and queer romance and queer heroism. I think that there's a great way that those Under the Gaydar books can surprise people with delightful queerness who maybe weren't looking for it.
Delightful surprises.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. I feel like whenever these kind of conversations come up, people think in polarized ideas, like, oh, everyone needs to be super out, or like things need to be stealth, when really what queer stories need is that we need a huge canon. We need a bunch of books that, like Alex said, that fall under each category, so that there's options, and like not just options, but like diverse options.
Yeah.
So definitely, yeah, there's room for both of those, and we just need more and more and more. So keep writing more and more and more so that you can join us. And it's not like this weird, like, well, that's the one book that deals with this, and that's the one book that deals with that. So that, you know, there's plenty of space. Let's start filling it up.
I'd also love to see some books get more than one kind of packaging. Like if they're going to get repackaged anyway, which some of them are. I know Harper's doing a whole bunch of them, including Simon. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if we could have two versions for some of these really big books? I don't know how feasible that is. Probably not at all. But anyway, that's my dream. Anna-Marie, Adrienne, any thoughts on either of those things?
Kind of just what Aiden was saying, more of everything, I think is great. Because I do think, you know, I really am pro it being used in marketing and being really loud about it. But then I think that and those are the readers I'm most focused on getting, like, for example, an ace romance into the hands of somebody who really needs that. But there are also, like you said, people who should be surprised by it. They might avoid the book and be like, oh, that's not for me because it's gay, you know. But it was in there. They might read it and either see themselves or just see recognize friends and family in it, and that's really important too. So yeah, more of everything.
Yeah. All right. We have very little time. So I want to know from everybody, what do you have up next?
I have In the Ravenous Dark coming out with Imprint Macmillan. It's May 18th, 2021. It's super queer. It's a pansexual main character, lesbian love interest, an NB ace best friend, and it's also poly. There's a poly triad in it. So very, very excited about that. And it's more dark fantasy, really morbid, lots of underworlds, blood magic, death magic. So I'm really excited.
Amazing. And Anna-Marie, you mentioned the Mirror season.
Yes, Mirror season is out next spring. That is the book that goes with the I Am So Queer Even My Dulce is Pen, as previously referenced by Dahlia. So it's a Snow Queen reimagining about a girl who is coming back from sexual assault and whose family has an enchanted pasteria. And this fall, I have Miss Meteor out with Taylor K. Mejia, which is a book about brown girls, beauty pageants, and a Selena-themed diner.
Amazing. And that's September 22nd?
Oh, how do you know that and I don't? I forgot my own release date for a minute. Thank you, Dahlia.
I think it's September 22nd.
I think you're right. Yeah, you're right.
This is what I do. This is all I know. This is all I can remember. All right, and Alex, you obviously have the trilogy ender.
Yeah, Goldwings Rising, September 1st. The stakes are higher. Everything's happening. I'm really excited. It's also the first series I've done where they didn't redesign the cover midway through. So it's the first series I'll ever have. It's my 25th book, but it's the first that matches all the way through. I can't wait to have a matching set. I'm so
That's
excited.
amazing. And they're beautiful. You have fantastic covers for that series.
Elizabeth H. Clark is the designer and brilliant, and I'm obsessed.
Amazing.
And then I have my next thing, I think we're announcing it in a week or two. It's going to be middle grade. It's probably my favorite world building I've ever done. I can't say much about it. I'm dying because it has the best blank meets blank ever. I can't say it, and it's hurting me. It's physically hurting me not to say it right now.
This is physically hurting me too, frankly. Okay, this was a little mean, but all right.
You'll know soon.
Hope so. All right, and Aiden, you've got 2 books on tap.
Yeah, so Cemetery Boys, which I've been talking about this entire time, comes out September 1st. And then March 23rd, 2021 is when Lost in the Neverwoods comes out, which is a dark contemporary fantasy retelling of the Peter Pan canon. It kind of takes place after the original story that we're really familiar with. And the premise is that Wendy and her brothers went missing in the woods behind her house when she was little. Wendy was found, her brothers weren't, and the only trace of them was their blood under her fingernails. And then we jump to her 18th birthday. Kids are starting to go missing in the small town of Astoria where she lives, and everyone starts connecting it back to her. And then Peter shows up, and things get complicated and spooky.
So creepy. I'm so excited. Oh, I'm sorry. I think we have this one question that's for Alex. But do the birds fly higher?
Yes, it's the third book is the altitudinous. Yeah.
Okay.
Everything gets higher and yet somehow paradoxically deeper.
Just want to make sure I'm really on top of all the questions. It seemed like an important one. Oh my God, I want everything. I'm so excited. And 3 books already just from this little chat in September. That's amazing. Yay. Yay, Queer YA. So I know that there is a question for everybody. I don't know what it is. All right, okay. I guess that's not coming yet. Oh, sorry. 1 second. Somebody talk about something else. Okay. Or if anybody has any more recommendations that they didn't get to give before, now is the time. Anybody miss anything that they wanted to mention?
I think a question just popped up on the screen.
Oh, okay. Oh, I had it before and I didn't ask. I'm sorry. What are some of the things that inspired you for your books entertainment-wise, like a movie, TV show, or song?
So for me, for Cemetery Boys, it's like the comps that I use is Road to El Dorado, Coco, which is just kind of a given because it's the other one with Dia de Muertos, but also On My Block, which is a it's a TV show on Netflix, and I describe it as like Degrassi, but all brown and black kids in LA, and it's really good. And it's hilarious, and the soundtrack is incredible. So I super, super highly recommend that one.
Okay, sold.
I wrote a lot of the series while listening to video game soundtracks. So Assassin's Creed, the music of Assassin's Creed, like wrote the series with me. And weirdly, and it didn't start consciously, but eventually became conscious. The Iliad was a big influence for the last two books in the Skybound saga. I'm married to a classicist. I think that's
what happens. How about you, Adrienne? A movie, TV?
Movie Beyond the Black Door is definitely inspired by Labyrinth and Phantom of the Opera type stuff, except just a little bit more queer.
My entire sexuality was basically David Bowie's codpiece in Labyrinth.
Excellent.
Anna-Marie, how about you? Movie, TV?
I have never seen this movie, and I've been told that I need to.
Labyrinth.
I've never seen this movie. So
I haven't either, but I've never seen anything.
Right now, I'm listening to a lot of Lila Downs, who absolutely beautiful singer. She sings in Spanish and spectacular guitar work. So I love listening to music to get inspired for what I'm writing.
Oh, cool. And for me, obviously, Demi Lovato, because cool for the summer. I know nobody was really asking me, but I will squeeze that in any chance I get because I'm so proud of myself for writing a book where I could listen to that song as research. All right. So I think that we are wrapping it up. And now there really is just one last question, which I'm not sure what it is.
Oh, I'm also going to add that because I had to learn to make pan dulce like for real for Mirror season. I watched a lot of Nailed It to make me feel better about how long it took me to learn to make pan dulce properly.
Did you watch Nailed It Mexico?
Not yet.
You should watch it.
I'm so excited.
It's good.
I'm so impressed. My friend's 6-year-old loves that show, but I have never watched it. Okay, no, that was the last question in question. So if everyone has spread their love for books as much as they humanly can, I'm going to say thank you to Anna-Marie McLemore and Adrienne Strickland and Aiden Thomas and Alex London for joining us to talk about their books. There are links in the comments to buy them. Also, you can follow them all on Twitter or follow me. I'll be promoting their books till the end of time. And they're all fantastic. And, obviously keep an eye out for everything that's coming up. I'm really excited about all of them. And thanks to you all for joining us and talking about queer characters in magical worlds.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so much fun. Thanks, Dahlia, and thanks.
Together.
Bye.